Welcome to our webinar this week, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're having our webinar today for preparing for interviews and careers in consulting. So I'll pass it right on over to you, Anita, and you can get started.
Great. Thank you. So I appreciate everyone joining today. We'll go ahead and get started. So I thought I would start with a little bit of who am I and why am I here and why can I speak about this topic of prepping for interviews and careers in consulting. And I was really excited to talk about this topic because I do think, particularly for engineering students, as well as given my familiarity with Hopkins, albeit a long time ago, prepping for consulting jobs is a bit different from prepping for engineering jobs in terms of what the interviewers and the employers are looking for. So way back when, over 20 years ago, I was part of the class of 95. I was a biomedical engineer and ECE double major. My plan when I was at Hopkins was to go to grad school. I had applied to BME grad schools, gotten accepted to 2 master's programs. I was contemplating at the time UCSD and Northwestern. And actually an interesting thing happened. I finished up my Hopkins curriculum about a semester early. So I engaged pretty heavily with campus recruiting. I'd had an internship through Hopkins, actually, at an engineering aerospace company up in Towson. That was a great experience. But I had quickly realized that, and I'll talk about this a little later, I really didn't want to work in an engineering cube mindset. I really wanted to work in a space that was more interactive, as well as something that was more interactive than the lab environment that I'd been exposed to at Hopkins, and I was very intrigued by consulting. So since I was graduating a semester early, I actually took a job with Anderson Consulting, which is now Accenture, straight out of campus recruiting. Started when many of my peers were entering their second semester of senior year. And I planned to actually only join for a few months. I was planning on leaving to go to grad school. And an interesting thing happened when I went to go visit, I think it was Northwestern. I went to go visit maybe the engineering program in the morning and the MBA program in the afternoon. And I started realizing that I really liked the work that I was doing in consulting, and in some ways was more intrigued by the conversations I was having with the MBA program than I was with the engineering grad program. So I had deferred and applied 2 years in a row and decided not to go. And I've pretty much been a management consultant since January of '95. So I would call that the second semester of my senior year. I was at Accenture for almost 4 years, then moved on to a healthcare consulting firm called First Consulting Group. It was actually formed by a couple of ex-Accenture folks. It was about mid-size. It's now part of CSC, which is Computer Sciences Corporation. From '02 to '05, I led clinical consulting at GE Healthcare. So again, much more similar work around management consulting and health IT, but specific to GE's healthcare IT and electronic health record products. I made a little bit of a switch in 2005 where I was focusing on not only management consulting for hospital and healthcare, but also supporting the federal government. So adding in a policy component to my consulting, which I've been doing for the last 10 years or so. I'm the co-founder of what's 2 firms named Clinovations. One portion of Clinovations is now part of the advisory board company, and we maintain our small business focused on the intersection of public sector and government and health, called Clinovations Government and Health, where I'm the CEO and co-founder currently. Just a little bit about some other things that I'm involved in. I'm on the board of directors of Cost of Care. It's a nonprofit focused on clinician-facing value transparency, and I know that's a very big phrase, but the short version is, as we look at having doctors do no harm, we believe that financial harm is a type of harm. So my work is in looking at how do we use technology at the point of care so that clinicians understand the costs of care to patients. been continuing to be involved with Hopkins and the engineering alumni, and have another board position that will come up later this year. And I thought for fun I would throw in something that is a little bit different when you're starting to think about a management consulting career compared to a maybe a bit more research or an engineering career. Your publications are a little different. I've got two publications I highlighted that one I co-authored, the other one I authored, both around healthcare, and they are the Wiley for Dummies publications and books. One is Electronic Health Records for Dummies, and the other one's Interoperability for Dummies for healthcare. So when I came to Hopkins, I thought, well, typical with my background, well, maybe my options are doctor, lawyer, engineer. I'm not a doctor. I am working in healthcare. Not a lawyer, but working in the policy space. Engineer, I would say I'm not so sure I have much of my engineering street cred, but I definitely work in technology. And the picture I have here is just what I thought I was going to do as a senior in high school when I had planned to enroll at Hopkins and been accepted. And I thought I was going to be working in much more of the making of artificial, looking at how do we make equipment that is replacing organs, but not so much. I won't spend a lot of time here on my life at Hopkins, but I think it may be similar to many folks who are here on the call. When I started at Hopkins, you're kind of thrown into the engineering curriculum. I ended up starting out BME Chemie and moving to BME ECE. Did research for 2 years. $500 I think was what I took for the. I think it might have been per month. Yes, it was per month. I was wondering if it was actually the whole summer. But hey, I was back in the 90s. I was able to pay my rent with my summer job. During the summer after my junior year, throughout the first semester of my senior year, I really wanted to take a job. One, I was interested in something that had a little bit more income, and two, wanted to do something in industry. So as I mentioned, I worked in an aerospace company and learned a lot. And thought I would take my second semester at Hopkins to study abroad, learned that I was done. So I went to work instead and started working at Accenture, and I have campus recruiting and career services definitely to think about that. So I'm just taking a look at time. Just a little background on my work now and the firm to give some context. As I mentioned, I focus on the intersection of bringing together clinicians, technologists, and policy background in management consulting. So our clients are the government and the commercial sector, as well as state, local government, technology vendors, and other public agencies. And we focus on bringing together those skill sets of clinicians, technologists, and policy experts to really navigate some of the new changes that are happening, mostly around the use of electronic health records and the fact that we are trying to make health information more electronic, more structured, more coded, so that we can garner more information and use the information we're collecting at the point of care more effectively to improve health. And when you think about management consulting in healthcare, so obviously I have a very specific vertical sector that I've focused on in management consulting, and that's been healthcare. But even though this picture has a lot of players in healthcare, you can apply this to anything. You can apply this to manufacturing. You can apply it to finance. There is always a set of stakeholders at the middle. There are many, many segmented organizations that have their roles and their services, and the fact of the matter remains, to continue to improve, to continue to be efficient, to be cost effective, and deliver quality, it requires exchanging a lot of information amongst your different stakeholders and often different systems. And that is a lens of management consulting that I focus on. You could focus more on the strategy and not focus on the technology. You could focus more on the technology. But the gist of management consulting is organizations that, management consulting companies, support their clients in really bringing staff to be critical problem solvers and thinkers to solve a specific problem. As I mentioned earlier, about consulting, what I learned about myself in working in engineering, even though some of my early clients might have put me in a cube farm that looks like the top left, my day was not spent sitting sort of as a posterior in your seat in a cube. It was very interactive in terms of working with customers, working with clients, looking at how processes were implemented. And I also learned that in engineering, we had two different types of folks. We had many folks, and the picture in the middle here was the picture in the middle here was intended to depict that I had colleagues in engineering who were really excited to spend their all-nighter, spend a lot of time coding or doing work to see a light bulb turn off, or different colors, and so they thought that was really cool. And I guess now I can say, yep, that is pretty interesting. But I much more preferred spending all of that time and all of that energy to see change happen in terms of change in how people worked, change in an overall efficient process. So I kind of learned that hardcore engineering was not my best suit. I really liked working with people and focused on applying my technology foundation to healthcare. And quite frankly, hadn't had a lot of business exposure and business background in my time at Hopkins with 2 engineering majors, and I was completely enthralled and intrigued by this whole notion of business. Kind of laughing at this picture in the bottom right. I can't say that what I learned was that we were going to be as electronic as we are today, but things were a little different back then. So when the consultants came to recruit, so today's talk, and most of the time I'm going to talk for about 30 more minutes and then make sure that we have about 20 minutes for open conversation and questions. But what was great, and I know that this is true at Hopkins, that there's a number of consulting firms that come on campus to recruit. So I noticed something different when the consultants came on campus. I noticed that there was a noticeable difference in the people skills of the people that came. I appreciated in many cases that they brought back alumni, and if they could, they brought recent alumni so that you could see folks that you had known, either socially or academically a year earlier. They were very excited about their jobs. You could tell that they worked very extensively in teams, and I also appreciated that nobody was doing the same thing, every day, year over year, or even month over month, or maybe had small, short-term or medium-term client engagements, but they knew that they were going to be moving on to something different. I'll admit that at the time, I really couldn't tell what they did all day. And I would say even when I took the job, there was a lot of verbiage and nomenclature that was used that was really unclear to me. So you'll see me say later, I think it's really important for you to get some insight into what is it that folks are doing all day. But I think something that is important in management consulting is that your first job or your first role often has nothing to do with your overall consulting career. In consulting, they'll certainly want to know that you have the capability to master skills and that you're intelligent and you're a strong problem solver and critical thinker, but they're not going to worry about whether you have some particular technical background or you learned something really well in your classes. And something to get comfortable about in looking at careers in management consulting, and I'll admit it took me a little bit of time, it took me a couple of years actually to get comfortable with this, is gosh, I spent the last 3.5, 4 years working on something here in engineering and I'm not using it. And I'm here to tell you, yeah, you'll use the soft skills, you'll use the problem-solving skills, you will not probably use some of the technical skills from your engineering program. So when I mentioned, I thought, I had no idea what I thought they did all day. So again, ask your interviewers for day in the life scenarios. So is a consulting career for you? As I was preparing for this talk, I realized how different life is today to 20 years ago. And you'll hear this repeated theme. There is so much information on the internet. Even in terms of prepping for management consulting, prepping for interviews, that was really limited, obviously, 20 years ago. So we took a lot of our advice from the teams and the alumni that came on campus. But kind of taking a step back, is a career in consulting for you? There are a couple of different types of consulting. There's generalist firms. There's firms that focus on strategy, and they're mostly looking at things at a high level, at an organizational level, making strategic recommendations for the organization, and then those consulting firms typically move out, and then either the company themselves, the client, executes on those recommendations, or they might hire different types of consulting firms depending on what the recommendation is. There are IT foundation consulting firms and a lot of the management consulting firms, and I believe predominantly those that are recruiting on campus at Hopkins are a mix of sort of the management consulting and IT firms. So, by IT, it doesn't in no way means that you're going to be sitting there and programming. I will say, as an engineering major and someone with technology, my first project at Accenture did involve programming, and I got away with doing very little programming at Hopkins, even with my ECE double major. But I did that for about a year, and then I really moved on to other roles in terms of design and more data-oriented work and strategy work. But my development and my coding foundation still serves me really, really well to this day. And the type of coding and the type of programming that I did 20 years ago, the concepts still hold. And it was very different, the type of programming and the thinking that we would do in a consulting job versus what we're typically doing in our curriculum at Hopkins. And then there's a number of industry-specific medium, small consulting firms, as well as verticals that exist in IT management consulting and strategy firms, such as healthcare, finance, telecom products. I'm sure there's many I haven't even thought about. So there are a lot of options. I said this already, use campus recruiting. I noticed, thank you for joining here today. Notice there's a couple of upcoming events, including a speed networking prep, so I will definitely be plugging that. But I was very excited to see some of the Career Center information, upcoming events, announcements, and resources on the Hopkins Career Center site. So I'm really excited that you guys have that as a resource. So now let's talk a little bit about prepping for the interviews themselves and selling yourself. The reality is these firms are getting a lot of resumes, and the best thing I can say is those universities, such as Hopkins, that have major consulting firms coming on campus, they don't go everywhere. And when consulting firms, and I recruited for Accenture on campus, so I came back for all 4 of the years that I was at Accenture, I came back and I recruited at Hopkins. And there are open slots. We want to hire, these firms want to hire folks from Hopkins. So how do you get your resume noticed? How do you get noticed in a meet and greet and a networking event so that your name is recognized when they're going through resumes and say, yeah, I've met this person, we should definitely interview them. You can't see certain things across the room and table when they meet you. They can't tell how intelligent you are. They assume you're intelligent because you're a Hopkins student. They can't tell how your work is going to be of the highest quality, and they can't really see your dedication. So when you're going through initial screening, interviewers in management consulting are looking for a couple of key skill sets. They're looking for strong communication skills, and you'll hear these come up on and on through today's talk. In addition to communication skills, confidence and grace under pressure. It's not that you need to know everything. We don't want you to be overconfident, but we want to be able to know that you can handle it. They want to see energy and enthusiasm. They want to see that you have problem-solving skills. And at the end, I mean, all they can really screen for right now is if they're going to put you in a business environment and, frankly, charge 3 times what you're making per hour as an hourly rate, and they're going to charge over $100 an hour for your time, how will you appear as a fresh out of college consultant in front of a client? Are you able to represent yourself well? So let's start with your resume. And I have two different sets and pictures. This is where I admitted, as I was looking through examples in my repository, there were just better examples on the internet. There's a lot of examples of different resumes and resume formats. Spend the time, take a look at them, see what you like. You can still have a little bit of personality in your resume, but there are a couple of things that you do want to make sure that it is, in fact, a professional resume. So a couple of key things that we notice. Definitely get a professional email address. I will say that if you have a Hopkins email address, that's just fine. As long as your alias or your username is something similar to your name. I can't tell you the number of resumes that that I've received that are great for personal purposes. They're very fun email addresses and usernames, but they just don't represent well at the top of a resume. So if you're mostly using Gmail, sign up for something else with your name or something a little bit more professional. Or I know Hopkins has a process for getting email aliases, so definitely get that set up. I still have mine, and I use it extensively. No-brainers here, proofreading and spell checking. I will say spell check does not catch everything. There are a lot of words that are appropriate in terms of spell check, but they're not going to be grammatically correct. So you do have to look at this again and again. Ask others to look at your resume. When you look at when you list your background, definitely focus on things that you've done in college and internships. I often, once you have a college degree, my recommendation is you do not need to list your high school activities. You don't need to list where you went to high school. We're focused on the fact that you are a top-tier college educated graduate, and that's the view that you want to present. This worst resume blunders ever has some fun examples. So I think the slides in this presentation deck will be available if you're not able to see that or read that read that well. But I think these are great examples, and I have to say I've seen every single one of these from both experienced hires and out-of-college hires. As I mentioned, you have the internet. Please use it. There are a lot of great websites. I actually really liked, in prepping for this presentation, some of the guidance on Business Insider. I thought it was simple, clean, and had great resources for both college graduates as well as folks further in their career. And I'm not supported by Business Insider at all. But here's an example of something I thought that was very clean, right? At this point, you don't necessarily need to have your address in resumes. I think it's okay. I mean, that one's kind of interesting. I like to know where my candidates are based. But in terms of emails, again, having something that represents your name and isn't a little bit too personal. If you're going to put in things like links in LinkedIn, make sure that we have the URL so we can click on them. Having multiple versions of your resume. So I tell this to anyone that's seeking a job, both a college student or someone after college. I had probably 6 different versions of my resume. So tailor your resume. Get your base down. Have a narrative statement that basically positions that your goal for getting a job, for example, in management consulting, and also even tailors your bullets about some of your experience that are tailored more for management consulting. And you can imagine, I've seen where someone just took a resume that they sent to a very hardcore engineering job and sent my way for a consulting job. And I said, well, are they just sending resumes out to everyone? And very well, you might be sending resumes out to anyone and everyone, and that's okay. We expect you to do that, but we don't want to see it. Formatting, I'll get to that later, but your resume is the one document that you've had a lot of time to spend on that shows that it's how you proofread and how you present yourself and your information. Formatting is important. Consistency is most important. Doesn't mean you have to be super formatted, but you do need to be clean and consistent. Things like number 7 here in terms of current job is in past tense, looking at what's in the present, what's in the past, making sure that it's updated. Any of your work experience having the right amount of detail, no spelling and grammatical errors, dates and consistencies, so consistent format. Are you going to look at writing out your month and your year? Are you going to have just a number for your month and your year? You're going to have 2-digit years. You're going to have 4-digit years. Again, that's called attention to detail, which is very, very important in consulting. Nothing wrong to say, references available upon request. I think we know that that is true. To just list it and take the real estate to say references available upon request. I think if you're being considered for a job interview, they will ask you for references. You're expected to provide them. So one of our recommendations, particularly for on-campus recruiting for a management consulting job, I wouldn't lose the real estate on note unless you're actually going to list references immediately. So creativity. I was like, this on the right was, I think, a resume that was fairly successful back in 2007 for, I can't remember where this individual had applied. It's definitely very different, definitely gets noticed. But notice at the top, I said, you're not applying to Google. But, then I thought, well, you might be. I saw that Google was recruiting and was on campus. But again, you can have different versions of your resume. This is another favorite I found from Business Insider. They had cool resumes that landed interviews at Google and other top jobs. You'll see this later. We're not applying to a startup. This is a very, management consulting is a very, has much more of a professional demeanor and culture. You want to see individuality and creativity, but it does need to be a little bit managed in terms of ensuring that you're representing the brand. And know your interviewer or your audience before sharing something out of the box. So it's okay to show your creativity, or once you feel like you've established a relationship with your interviewer and you want to send something else to say, hey, as a side note, or we talked about this, thought you might be interested in seeing this, I've attached it here. But not for your initial submission. This one I think has been talked about a lot, I hope, for college recruits, but I can't emphasize this enough. Clean up your social media profiles. And there's some importance in locking down your profiles early. There's cache content. I pop every interviewee's name into Google. We'll Google you, so definitely Google yourself. So for some of the standard stuff that I think about, look at your pictures. Remember, it's not only your post, but it's also your friends' post. If they tag you or they list your name, if some of their pictures of you come up pretty high in search engine rankings, that's going to come up on that first page or second page. If you have a lot of public-facing blogs, social media, what have you, that's complaining about school or work, as legitimate as it may be, remember, these folks don't know you. They're going to get their first impression or second impression of you based upon what they read. Keep the political commentary, I would say moderate. So, and then oversharing or emotional posts. We understand that you may have items that have already been posted, but you want to keep those to a minimum or clean them up. LinkedIn, if you elect to have a LinkedIn profile and site, please, please, please use a professional headshot. The number of folks that we see on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn has pretty high search engine optimization. So when we Google your name, your LinkedIn profile is going to show up top. And you see a picture that's really something that should be on some sort of personal social media site. So please have your LinkedIn, even if you're not going to go in and have a professional shoot your picture, it should be something that represents you in some level of professional form. Facebook, even if you lock down your profile so folks can't click on your Facebook, you should definitely have your basic picture be something that well represents you well. Twitter, take a look and clean your tweets. Instagram, again, locking it up, same thing with the pics, and same goes for blogs, Vine, Snapchat, YouTube, and there's lots of other types of social media I have no idea about because I'm too old to comment on them or use them. So dressing for your interviews or meetups. Management consulting, again, culture. It's not a startup. It's not college. So research the company brand and follow it. They may say that, meet and greets may be business casual. They will say, might talk about professional style. It's always okay to be a notch overdressed. So in general, for your formal interviews, wear a suit. And this is advice that was given to, I remember this when I was an Accenture interviewee at Hopkins. We actually had folks come down and say, guys, go get your shirts starched and add extra starch. You can only wear them once, but having something in your shirt that looks like it is appropriately and professionally pressed is important, and you will have to go back to the dry cleaner and have it cleaned or pressed again. But it does help you portray a much more professional persona when you're coming in for an interview. You can still have a bit of fun and personality in how you're dressing, but again, keep it conservative. Be well groomed. There's some fun examples of casual, so I'll quickly flip through this. I don't think in any circumstance in the interview or business standpoint you really want to be completely casual. But there's some examples here in terms of mainstream casual, executive casual, which is what I call something that's more business casual. No flip-flops for women. Make sure your shirts and your necklines are at a right place. Same thing for men. Closed-toe shoes, socks, having everything be appropriately pressed. And then, going into traditional business attire, again, back to suits. There is a little bit of a difference. Typically, you have a little bit of flexibility in general business attire versus if you're in a board or in sort of executive presentation and meetings. Coming back to, colors, again, the more conservative, charcoal gray, navy blue. For women, there's a couple of rules that I mentioned some of the necklines. Also, in terms of if you elect to wear a skirt, there's two ways to look at this. You put your arms down and put your fingertips down, ensuring that no skirt is above the tips of your fingers. And then they should also not be any shorter than 2 fingers. We should say 2 inches, but I guess I'll say, yeah, to err on the safe side, 2 fingers above the knee. Interview prep. I'm just looking at what I have here. Okay, I'll work through these pretty fast. So in the old days, in some traditional interviews, you'll have general questions. Tell us about yourself, why do you want to work here, etc. Newer interviews, or I'd say more so over the last 20 years, interviews for management consulting have been a bit more case-based, and they're looking for specific behaviors. Definitely look to talk to alumni about their experiences. A great resource to research companies is Glassdoor, and I'll give you some examples that actually have been posted by college recruits about their interview experiences on Glassdoor. There's a number of websites out there for management consulting sample case questions. Take a look at them. We're not going to have time today to kind of go through details of elevator speeches. I know that there is an upcoming workshop on perfecting your elevator speech offered by Hopkins Career Center this week, or I think maybe tomorrow. Please do go to that, or at least look up and practice your elevator speech. It's something that should be about 60 seconds or so. In prepping for your interviews, record yourself. You have Skype, FaceTime, etc. See how you are presenting yourself, both on video, your audio, etc. And also in prepping for an interview, prep questions for your employer. They don't want you coming, they want to know that there's two-way interest. You're interviewing them as well as them interviewing you. So I won't go through all of these since you'll have them for references, but in terms of some of the interview basics, be early, don't be late. You got to know how long it takes to get to the interview location. You want to show that you're engaged. You can do that with a firm handshake, make eye contact throughout the interview. Definitely want to appear interested, and but while not appearing overconfident. Having a pen and paper so that you can write things down makes you look very prepared. I've had folks who, during an interview, they may be telling you information to prep for something, a next step you look prepared if you have something to write it down on. In today's day and age, I know many folks are very fast with typing. I will say this, I type faster than I can write. I can look at the interviewer. I can look at people when they're and type at the same time. It is a little bit more impersonal, so I don't recommend it for a first interview or if it's the first time you're meeting someone, just so you could ensure that you are giving them your full intention versus focusing on typing. Bring hard copies, resumes, ask if the interviewer has one. In most cases these days, we have the resumes electronically. So many times I don't have time. I haven't had time to go print it out before I could show up for the interview. So I'm going to look at it online, or I'm going to glance at it before I walk into your interview. But if you have a hard copy, I can have it in front of me, and I'm going to be more prepared for that dialogue. And it's just nice for me to have so that you're not expecting that the interviewer comes in and prints it out. If you have some impressive, presentations, writing samples, items that are great for show and tell, have them in your back pocket, have them in your bag, but, it's a little aggressive to just kind of have that in your package, that you provide to the interviewer along with your resume. If it comes up in conversation, you can, pull it out of your bag or offer to send them a copy. I really do like when fresh out of college grads have something that they can show me that they have done some of their work products. So make that offer to send examples and follow-ups. Goes without saying, turn off your cell phones, devices, send a thank you email. Soon thereafter, people ask, well, should I handwrite or not? I mean, I'll tell you personally, I'm happier on email. I mean, it's nice when people do handwritten letters. It doesn't happen very often. I'm just happy to see it in a prompt manner, so it reminds me of you, and email is usually the best way to do that. I think on the don'ts, I covered most of them. Definitely look at your resume. Don't be chewy. No gum. I can't tell you the number of people I've interviewed that have gum. They may not even be chewing it, but I can in their mouth. Please get rid of it. And then there's kind of the etiquette, Wait before you ask about compensation. Make sure that you're vetting the job, vetting the role before you go into that. And no bashing of your prior employers. You can certainly indicate why you might want to move on, but definitely be diplomatic. So I'm gonna go through a couple of these pretty quickly, but in terms of behavior interviewing, there's a lot of cases that the goal is for a management consultant firm to see certain behaviors. They have a lot of examples of cases. They want to see how you resolve conflict, how you challenged authority or managed authority, how you work with your peers, how you self-assess yourself. And at the end of the day, there are many of these sort of behavior interviewing questions. They care more about how you handled it yourself rather than what happened, because that's not entirely in your control. They want to see a tactful approach in addressing your opinion. And it is okay if you're wrong. You don't have to have every scenario be, hey, I challenged authority and authority was wrong and I was right. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And as I mentioned, it's more about the how than the what. So I'm just kind of flipping these up on Glassdoor. These happen to be for Accenture, but there's a couple of examples here that people have offered in terms of experience on their interviews. So encourage you to take a look and you're prepping for a management consulting interview. This is one that you can actually see if they received an offer or not received an offer, whether they thought it was a positive experience and whether they accepted it. So this was an employee referral, but there's some really good questions. I think the lunch and some of these other pieces may not be the case for, I don't know if they're still doing that for fresh out of college hires, but there's really good information there. So please research it and please use it. Quickly, in interviews, not everything's in person. There are a couple things on phone and on video. Please use a landline when possible. If you have a cell, I mean, I recognize that many folks don't even have a landline nowadays. Make sure you record or have a friend test out the clarity of your line and the lack of background noise. You need to have signal. Please, please, please don't take these calls outside. I can't tell you the number of interviews I do that sound like they're, in an airport, there's overhead noise. Make sure your phone's charged. Prep questions again. Ask about next steps and timing. If you recognize this is a Verizon guy and this is a guy standing on top of buildings, can you hear me now? You don't want to be in that scenario. Video interviews, test out your connectivity and speed, test out your microphone. Put a note on your door if you're doing it in your dorm room or in an office that say your interview in progress, please don't come in, so that folks don't barge in. I added this one as I was prepping. I do a lot of presentations and video interviews. If they're going to see your screen, log out of email, iMessage, chat, your cell phone away, get those all turned off. And remember, the interviewer can see what's behind you. You're in college, but the interviewer is not. Is your room messy? Clean it and organize it. Is it cluttered or have too much of a personal touch? This might be a personal opinion, but this picture here in the middle is certainly very organized. But there's a lot of pillows. There's a lot of fun things on the wall that are, that might not be quote unquote professional. Versus the one on the right, it's clean. It's there's not a lot of personal items in there. If your room isn't ideal, do find another location. Let me just check. I'm just going to quickly. I'll do this one real quick. So I mentioned a little bit about in-office scenarios. So here's an example of, in addition to some of the cases, we've sent interviewees articles to read where they have to write a memo or develop a PowerPoint. There's a little bit here on the left of what we're looking for. But the point I wanted to make today was, I want to give an example of 3 candidates. Actually, 2 were Hopkins alums. All 3 were hired in this example, but they had 3 different approaches. One was very creative, didn't have a lot of text on slides, had handwritten notes that she looked at when she was ready to present, but was just very interesting in terms of use of how information was organized, how they were creative with visuals. Another one had slides that weren't necessarily noteworthy. They were mostly text, but I was amazed in the short time of prepping, the presenter never looked at her slides, never looked at never looked at her paper, never looked at anything. So made a different impression in terms of the ability to capture and understand information quickly and be able to communicate effectively. Last, the slides were run-of-the-mill. In this case, the presenter was able to relate to the audience and pull in relevant personal experiences, which was also very engaging. So 3 different approaches, 3 different candidates. It's not, is your PowerPoint good? Is your memo the best? It is a combination of your abilities as a candidate. So I'm just kind of doing a time check, and I know I want to open it up for questions. So these slides will be available. There's a couple of additional examples of potential cases, what to do when you're stumped. I think these are pretty self-explanatory for you to take a look at and have takeaways. Preparation for non-seniors, opportunities to engage in leadership on campus, start to prep your social media profile. And then lastly, as I mentioned, I'd already pitched, building your elevator pitch. There's, looks like this is tomorrow, there's a networking prep, so I encourage you to go to this. And then after this, I have this in the deck, but it's actually exact slides that I've used for our existing company for team members to build their elevator pitch. So it's not just something that you have to do now, you have to do it forever and constantly update it and have different versions of it. So it was adapted and pulls off the Harvard Business School elevator pitch tool, which they don't have posted anymore, but it's got some, we adapted it to kind of look at some words and describe who you are in 4 to 5 quick questions so that you can start to formulate your elevator pitch. So I encourage you to look at tools, go to the session on campus, and happy to have you refer to this deck as well. So with that, I'll pause and stop for questions, and I have my contact information here in the deck, which best ways to reach me are via email and Twitter. So with the Hopkins crew, I'm assuming you're opening up the line for questions, or how would you like to handle?
Yeah, so it looks like we've got some questions coming in through the text. So I'll just ask them out loud, Anita, and if you don't mind, is that okay?
yeah, so that we can have them on the recording. Let me see. Oh, I am right. I think I can see them, and I can see them as well. So great.
Great. So regarding resumes, can you reiterate which portions should be centered? I had not heard that before.
So, rather than centered, I would say aligned. So it's about consistency. I mean, often maybe your name is centered at the top, but I think it's about looking, look and feel and clean. So in the example that had been given, something was centered and something else was not. So it all comes back to consistency. So not necessarily recommending that something in particular is centered.
I have a question that might be helpful for our listeners. So do you have any examples of like a poor elevator pitch, like something where somebody just instantly kind of turned you off from their interview process?
So, what's interesting with elevator pitches in the interview process, I would say when we're, oh, yeah. So this one's a common one, I would say, even with Hopkins candidates especially, right? Know your audience and who you're speaking with. So I had looked at someone's resume, and it clearly, I could look at it, and I'm probably, I don't know, I'll probably miss this now when folks are applying, but I guess it's the best advice I can give. I could tell that they were pre-med. I could just tell by the classes, could tell by, the way the content that was in the resume. And this isn't exactly an elevator pitch, but I kind of said, I'm like, oh, yeah, well, you're pre-med. I'm like, it looks like you're pre-med. Have you taken the MCATs, or are you planning on doing that this summer then? And this is for an internship interview. I remember this now. I'm like, I'm going to take it this summer. So I clearly knew in that particular example that this is not someone who's applying for a management consulting internship that has a commitment to management consulting. So, in that particular example, I was like, I kind of quickly cut that interview short and moved on to the next candidate. And I don't know in the end if that person went to medical school or not, but I think in your elevator pitch, the takeaway there is to know your audience and what you're interviewing for, and to tailor your elevator pitch. So I'm not saying that you want to quote unquote lie, but you have to focus on the relevant portions for the job and the interview process. Another one would be there are cases where I've had some folks who are pretty confident about where they think they're going to be working, or how long, like, I'm going to work here for 2 years, and I'm going to apply to, I'm going to go to MBA school. And that's not an unreasonable path for someone that's taking a job in management consulting. But again, I think right now you're trying to say, I am the right candidate for this job right now. My future I will continue to evaluate, rather than, it's good to have goals, and once you're in your job you can have an open conversation about it, but I think it's a little bit much maybe up front to kind of state your elevator pitch to say, okay, well, in a few years I hope to not be here, right, at this job.
Okay, I've got another one here. It says, what kinds of business classes should I try to take in college?
So again, I mentioned I was at Hopkins over 20 years ago, and there weren't any. So I am excited to hear that there are business classes to take. I would say some of the best things that I learned, through my consulting career that I think you can gain in college is a business writing class. So actually, I didn't talk about this. The number one, one of the number one opportunities for engineers in particular in management consulting is a resource, is a team member that has technical skills, has those analytic abilities, that can write well and communicate well. And I thought I was going to be a terrible writer, and it was hard for me I had to spend time on just kind of thinking about my writing. And I remember a couple of years into my consulting career, one of my VPs and mentors said, well, your technical skills, you're a good writer. And I nearly fell out of the chair. I'm like, I'm a good writer? That's ridiculous. I couldn't even believe that. But now, I do a lot of writing. I can still cover things at a very technical level. So I would say definitely the business writing piece. And then another one is, it may not be a class, but there have been community events like Toastmasters, just being able to have practice in standing up and speaking off the cuff. I'll even say I struggle with this. I have to prep. I don't talk off the cuff. I needed slides. Like, I don't read the slides, but it just keeps me on pace. And I obviously ran a little bit even over even having those slides, but I like to have them for reference. So some of those business classes that do have you do a lot of presentation, synthesis of information, are really good classes that force you to get out of that typical engineering modus operatus. And then third, I would say if there's a basic finance class, you don't need it per se, but I would always say that having a foundation on just business financials and understanding business terms is a good class to take. So those are my three.
Great.
Note that I had none of them. So, and most of the people that we've hired, I hired in Accenture, hired into our firm from Hopkins and other places, didn't necessarily have any of those. So don't think of it as a requirement, but if you have the opportunity. Go ahead.
Sure. So it says, if the interview says you don't need to dress up, like for on-campus recruiting, should I still dress up?
Absolutely. So I would go back to never, never, never on the casual. Let's see if I can flip back. I would always keep it as business casual or further. Something that does work. I'm just gonna go through this. Something that often will work is, I think anything here in sort of mainstream casual and executive casual is fine. So it doesn't mean that you need to have a blazer. I think you just need to look presentable. So I would not show up with any jeans with any rips in them. When folks say to me in the business environment, you don't need to dress up. So I often, when I don't have clients in our office or Friday, we're relatively casual in our office. And I tell folks, hey, we're casual. What does that mean? I may be in jeans, nice shoes, and either a nice tailored like sweater or shirt, or often jeans and a blazer. So I will say, if they say you don't need to dress up and they say the word casual, in today's tech world, denim is not uncommon, but clean denim, and it's always better to be dressed up. I would say if they say it's casual, do you really want to be in a dark suit? Maybe not, but I would keep it to appropriate business casual. I wouldn't do flip-flops and nothing ripped, and just look presentable.
Great. Well, it looks like those are all of our questions. Any final words of advice or tidbits of knowledge to share, Anita?
I think we went through most of the deck, and the items that I didn't get through are available, and I think they have more text on those slides. I didn't talk much about Microsoft Office. Consulting careers use a lot of Office suite of tools and products. So there are a couple of bullets I had on one of those slides on what we're looking for. Again, I come back, it's the same thing as your resume. How do you present information? How do you organize information? Is everything in one big blob? It's also on how you communicate. Do you organize your thoughts in the right way, or in a rational way? And some of the nice touches when you're asked to do deliverables, I'll tell you one that melts my heart is someone actually put page numbers in the footers. They're actually putting something descriptive in the footer with the date. The file name represents a version number and a date, and there's headers and footers. I'm like, oh, this is so great. So I'm not going to have 15 files from 15 candidates that say, interview deck.ppt, right? So those type of things just show that you recognize how the information they're asking you for is going to be used and how it's going to be stored. So that's kind of I think that's also a nice touch.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Anita. Thanks for sharing and imparting your wisdom upon us today, especially during Engineering Week. So thanks for being a part of it.
Great. It's been fun. Thank you so much.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.